All right, scholars, we are going to try this new format. So instead of having you download the student packet and do the exit ticket and look at the lesson helper, we are going to combine them all in one. So once you're done with this quiz, you are done with ELA for the day. So the way this is going to go is I broke it up into cycles, and cycles are just different sections. So if you made it through cycle 1, you made it through the first part of the lesson. So there's different chunks, and you can see what those different chunks are. Cycle 1 for today is pages 161 to 164. This way it feels more like class, because in class we go through things in different sections. So this way you get that instruction, you answer the questions, and then we're done. The things that you will need for today, if you saw my greeting video, you'll see that you needed a book and note-taking materials today. You can find that book under this assignment. So when you clicked on this quiz, next to it there was also a, the book reading. So if you don't have your book at home, I want you to open up that document so that you can read along with me. If you have your book at home, I need you to have that out. I would also need you to have note-taking materials, so whether that's a notebook, just a piece of paper, and a pencil or pen, have that out. If you need to pause the video to go grab that, do that now. Okay, now that we have our materials, we are going to start our read aloud. We're going to start on page 161, starting with chapter 14. When we got into the restaurant, I could see that it was someone's living room that they'd set about 10 card tables and some folding chairs in. Every table was but one was filled, and there were 5 or 6 people standing in the doorway waiting to sit down. We said, "Excuse us," and walked right past. The smell of the place got in my nose, and I could tell why folks were lining up to get in. I closed my eyes and took in a big snort of air. It was like someone took a old pot and poured about 100 gallons of hot apple cider and 100 gallons of hot coffee into it, then stirred 8 or 9 sweet potato pies, crust and all, into that. Then let 6 big steamy meatloaves float on top of all that. Then threw in a couple of handfuls of smashed potatoes, then boiled the whole thing on high. This must be exactly how heaven smells. I could tell by the smell that Mr. Jimmy was telling the truth when he said this was the best restaurant in Grand Rapids. Shucks! I'd never eaten in one before, but I'd say this was the best restaurant in the world. I opened my eyes because the smell was starting to get me dizzy. On the other side of the room, Herman E. Calloway was sitting at the table with Mr. Jimmy and a woman. Steady Eddie pointed at the only empty table, one that had a sign saying "Reserved NBC" on top of it, and said, "That's where we're at. Over there, bud. NBC stands for Nobody But Calloway. Mr. C changes the name of the band so much that no one can keep up with the new names, so they call us NBC, so they don't have to change the sign." Before I could sit down with them, Mr. Jimmy saw us and said, "Here they are," and pointed at me and waved for me to come over to their table. Shucks! I'd rather sit with the band than with Herman E. Calloway. It would be hard to have a good time eating if you looked up and saw him every time you took a bite. The thug said, "Remember what I said?" pointing at the top of his head, and acted like he was smacking some kisses. I walked to the other table. Mr. Jimmy said, "Bud, this here's Miss Thomas. She's our vocal stylist." I could tell she could tell I didn't know what that meant, so she said, "I'm the singer, honey." I said, "Pleased to meet you, ma'am." She laughed and stuck her hand out for me to shake. There were about 9 diamond rings on just her right hand. She said, "Oh my, a gentleman! I'm pleased to make your acquaintance as well." Then she took all those ringed up fingers and rubbed them across my cheek, held my chin and said, "Come here, child," and pulled my face up close to hers. Uh-oh. I twisted up my face to get ready for a kiss, but instead she looked real close at me and said, "What's this, baby?" She rubbed her fingers over a couple of sting spots that I'd been scratching. For a second, I was going to tell her they were vampire bites, but something told me to tell the truth this time. We are going to pause right there. I want you to look at your quiz. And we can see that our first question is on page 63 when Miss Thomas asks about Bud's stings. He says, "For a second I was going to tell her that they were vampire bites, but something told me to tell her the truth this time." I want you to pause this video and answer that question. Why might Bud have considered telling her that they were vampire bites? And why do you think how do you think she would have reacted to that story? Pause the video and answer that question. We are going to continue, scholars. I said, "That's just some hornet stings, ma'am. I got bit up when the Amoses locked me in their shed." It was her turn to twist her face up. When who locked you in what shed? They were the people the home was paying to look after me. I got bit up by their fish head guards. I showed the woman the bite on my hand. I was surprised to see it was puffing out from pus. "My lord," she said, "Herman, this child's hand is infected. None of you men noticed how he looks?" Hermione Calloway said, "Talk to James. Far as I know, he's the only one who looked at the kid." Mr. Jimmy said, "Well, Grace, to be truthful, I did think the boy's face was a little swole up. But you know how dark it is in the cabin, and by God, there are some folks who just naturally have lopsided heads." She said, "Dark or not, even blind Lemon Jefferson could see something's wrong with this baby's eye. What happened here, Bud?" She touched underneath my eye as light as a feather. I said, "Well, ma'am, Todd Amos woke me up by shoving a pencil up my nose all the way to the R, and when I went to punch him, I slapped him instead, and it left a big welt on his cheek. So we put up our dukes and went at it, and it didn't take long before I knew I couldn't whip him, so I just curled up and fell down." I looked at Hermione Calloway to make sure he was listening to the next part. I wanted to let him know that even though he was real mean, our minds thought about things in the exact same way. I said, "I fell down, ma'am, 'cause the Lord give me the good sense to know when enough is enough." He acted like he didn't hear. We're going to pause right there. So we're going to go back to our quiz, and this is where you're going to answer those next two questions. The second question asks you to look at these following excerpts. How would you describe the way Bud relates his experiences? How does he describe them? Is he truthful? Is he lying even though he said he wouldn't? Does he exaggerate a lot? What is he doing in this section? And then I want you to compare that to the tone of Miss Thomas. How does Miss Thomas react to what Bud is saying? Is she all cool about it? Like, "Yeah, this is totally normal." Or is she really surprised? I want you to put that under this answer. I will I want you to pause here so you can answer that. And now looking at that last question of this cycle, I want you to remember that irony means the opposite of what is expected. So we've seen a couple examples of irony throughout this book. And our lesson objective for today was to still look at that irony. How is it still being used? So with one sentence, starting with the word while, I want you to tell me something that's ironic about Bud's decision to tell Miss Thomas the truth. Knowing that irony means the opposite of what is expected, do we normally expect Bud to tell the truth? When you're done, move on to the next cycle.